we are going to return to what I can only assume is a stack of newspapers in your house.
That's right.
We're gonna.
I like Post-its and I like stacks of newspapers.
No, we are going to return to the news. We do every once in a while an episode where we sort of bubble up some of the articles or things that you find on the internet that you think is interesting and worth talking about. So we've got 3 articles this time around. As we often do, we're going to talk about gut health and probiotics and how often they're misunderstood and how yogurt fits into the conversation. We're going to talk about the challenges of nutrient deficiencies for GLP-1 users. And then we're going to talk about something called functional foods, which I'm excited to get into. I feel like it's a term I've heard before, but I'm excited to actually learn what that is. So let's do the first one first, yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So this is a news article from The Independent titled 117-year-old reveals eating 3 yogurts a day could be the secret to a long life. And the subheading was Maria Breñas Morera said the secret to her longevity was eating 3 yogurts a day. So I guess we should perhaps start with yogurt and why they are the miracle that they are.
Yes. Why is yogurt getting this woman to 117?
Yes.
Pretty crazy. I've seen estimates that people think kind of 120 is the upper limit of longevity. So she's there.
Brian Johnson, though, he's going to go to 190.
That's true.
With no yogurts involved, I bet.
That's also true. It's probably too processed for him. But anyway, yeah, so kind of as you hinted at, the primary angle here is that Maria has this really healthy gut, and that's really the reason for this extreme longevity at 117. And when you hear healthy gut in the media, what they're talking about is kind of what species and in what numbers the person has along their GI tract. And we have thousands of these species. And one of the main categories of species that we find associated with better health outcomes, they're called bifidobacterium. Now, there are multiple different species, or you should think about it as different types of bifidobacterium. It's not just like this one microorganism. There's lots of different types of them. But collectively, they make up about 10 to 40% of the species in our gut microbiome. But I kind of just want to re-highlight that. It's not just like the bifidobacterium is one thing. There are subtypes of that called species, so different species of bifidobacterium. And then there are even subtypes of species called strains. So it's this really large umbrella category of bifidobacteria that can be broken down into the individual exact microorganism type. And so it gets pretty complex pretty quickly when we say, okay, well, what species should there be and how many should there be? Because now we're talking about lots of different possibilities. We're not just talking about one. But generally, when we collapse them all under this big umbrella classification of bifidobacterium, generally, the fewer somebody has of these bifidobacterium, the higher the risk they have of diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes and allergies and IBS, GI disorders, colon cancer, and even just various viral infections. These, of course, though, are association studies, which we've talked about the limitation of them. We don't know that if somebody increases the amount of bifidobacterium that they would be curative of those conditions. And we also don't know that if somebody's otherwise healthy and they increase their concentration of bifidobacterium that they would prevent any of those conditions. We just see these associations. But nevertheless, this is much of the focus of kind of probiotic supplementation or healthy gut protocols, is they're trying to manipulate the species present along your GI tract to kind of fall in line with where we see generally better health outcomes. Okay, so what does this have to do with yogurt? Well, yogurt tends to contain bacteria, these different species. It's really interesting though, for yogurt. They add 2 bacterial strains to create yogurt. Basically, the bacteria eats the lactose in the milk, and then that produces lactic acid, which is what makes yogurt then a little bit thicker and also a little bit tangy. But they don't add bifidobacterium to create yogurt. It's 2 other completely unrelated species. It's just that bifidobacterium may be added by some manufacturers for its probiotic-like effect. And so theoretically, some yogurts, we don't know about Maria, but some yogurts could be having this probiotic that we think might be beneficial, although we don't really know. And then, of course, yogurt has other nutrients like protein and calcium, which we know a lot more about.
Okay, we've talked about probiotics a bit before. You don't recommend them. I assume you also don't recommend eating 3 cups of yogurt for their probiotic effects.
Yeah, this hasn't really changed. This article hasn't really changed my my recommendations.
All right, sorry, Maria.
Yeah, we're not going to jump on the 3 yogurt a day, although I do think you can be healthy eating 3 yogurts a day.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think the premise is if it's because of this bifidobacterium species, which the article calls out, if the premise is that's the species we need, and of course there's multiple subtypes, but whatever, staying broad here, then we need to make sure that bifidobacterium is actually in the yogurt that we're eating, which is not true of all brands, as I just mentioned. We also need to make sure, this should come as no surprise to our audience, that if it is in the yogurt brand that we're eating, it's in the right dose, because the yogurt brand might just add a little bit because it's less expensive to add more of this. And so you might not be getting enough to have any therapeutic effect if there is one. But this is something also really interesting. We need to make sure that the bifidobacterium actually made it through the yogurt manufacturing process. I mean, to make yogurt, it's got to heat, and especially when it's done on a larger scale. I mean, they got to package it. They typically put some additives in it. It's going to get maybe acids added to it. It's going to sit out on a shelf for a while. Probiotics are live microorganisms that need to actually be alive and get to your GI tract still alive to then have this therapeutic effect. And so we actually have to test that. And that's a big limitation of probiotics. So based on all the manufacturing and storing, is that true of the yogurt brand that you're eating and still in the right dose? Okay, so those are all some issues to consider. We don't know what's true relative to Maria's yogurt brand. And then also, kind of as already hinted at, but we talked about in the Gut Health podcast, we don't really have evidence of what exactly is an optimal distribution of this different gut microbiome species. Like, what should it be? As I mentioned, there's these different subtypes of bifidobacterium. Turns out they change as we get older. We have a different distribution when we're younger, then they change to something else when we get older. Is that optimum that they change? And if it isn't, like, what should it exactly stay at? What's the ratio of the different species? So all of that stuff we still have to figure out. Like, we just can't say, oh, bifidobacterium. There's lots more details that we have to understand to be able to try to get after what could potentially be optimal. Now, you mentioned I don't recommend probiotics. I don't recommend probiotics prophylactically or preventatively, we should say. I do think there is a lot of uses for probiotics if we have some specific condition. Like if somebody says, I have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or I have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, then we want to look up, okay, which species and really strain do we have evidence for in humans, no surprise, that actually will help with the problem you have? And so that is where I think there is a real utility for probiotics, not just sort of taking some randomly and sort of thinking, I think this could potentially pay off when we don't have evidence of what that picture is that we're ultimately trying to get to. And so that's kind of more of a lock and key model that can be really effective for using probiotics. It's like, you want to find the specific species that we have evidence for, the condition that you need help with. Conversely, when you're otherwise healthy and you're just trying to, quote, optimize your gut microbiome, this is when we want to go back to the basics that we talk about all the time. If you're otherwise healthy, we don't take a lock and key approach. We take a shotgun approach because the basics are not so basic, as our friend Joey said, when we look at them mechanistically. They're much more far-reaching than necessarily supplementing with one specific probiotic strain.
It reminds me a little bit of your general philosophy around like multivitamins. Right?
Thank you. Yes. Exactly.
Yep. And so instead of a multivitamin, if you have a deficiency, okay, therefore, but not just blanket. I'm going to do this just because. Same with probiotics.
Just because.
Yeah. Okay. So if it's not the yogurt, any sense of, in this news article, any sense of perhaps what her secret was to get to 117 other than perhaps good luck?
Yeah, good luck, genetics, sure, that's going to be part of it. But yeah, I mean, the article actually tells us, if we just get past, the headline in the opening couple paragraphs, quote, before she died, Miss Moreira told an interviewer that the secret to her longevity was avoiding smoking and alcohol, going on daily walks, following a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, and eating 3 yogurts a day. She also put her long life down to being surrounded by friends and family and avoiding, quote, toxic people. Sounds like a lot of stuff that we talk about all the time. In fact, we didn't even get to the 3 yogurts a day till we got through 4 other things.
Yeah.
And I really liked it.
3 yogurts a day was the thing.
I know.
I mean,
it's like
everything else.
I know. Let's skip all the other things that she listed and just hone in on the 3 yogurts a day. I really loved a quote they had from a nutritionist. It's very late in the article, but they stressed that, yogurt isn't a silver bullet and that it's the overall quality of her diet that contributed to her old age and gut health, and that eating a variety of fruits and vegetables is one of the best things that you can do for your gut, is what this nutritionist is saying, because they're packed with fiber and polyphenols, which are these plant compounds that feed beneficial gut bacteria and help them flourish. I always call them phytochemicals polyphenols is a subtype of them. So same thing here. This should sound really familiar to our audience. But even as much as I love fruits and vegetables, it's not just the fruits and vegetables. We had all these other things she listed, right? No smoking. She says no alcohol. I think a certain amount of alcohol can be part of a healthy diet, but certainly not an unlimited amount or an excessive amount, right? She's also staying active. She's walking daily walks, and she's also reducing stress. All of those things are going to have this positive effect, not just on her gut health, but her overall longevity. Right. But the reason why I pulled this article is not because I just wanted to talk about probiotics, was I just thought it was like a great encapsulation of media around nutrition, because it's like, if you just look at the title and skim the first paragraph or two, like most people have time for, I think the attention span's about three seconds or something like that on media, you would think, what should I do to improve my longevity? Eat more yogurt, right? Oh shoot, I gotta up my yogurt consumption. And of course, yogurt can be healthy enough, but if you actually get past a little bit of that opening stuff, you learn, oh, there is no silver bullet, and perhaps I actually should be focusing more on fruits and veggies than yogurt. Oh, and shoot, there's some other lifestyle factors and some other diet factors that I need to be focusing on. So I think it was just such a great example of how they make something really clickable, but the evidence doesn't necessarily support exactly what the headline says, and that yet we have more evidence of the basics that we talk about all the time. Just probably not going to be as attention-getting as, oh, let me eat 3 yogurts a day and I'll live to 117.
Yeah, it's almost like if you remove the probiotic part of it, you could almost see like you could fit in almost anything instead of 3 yogurts a day, and that would still be what the article was about, right? If Mariah, she's like, I swear, 3 glasses of wine every night, and then all the other things, right? And then be 3 glasses of wine let you live to 117. It could be, I eat an ice cream every single night, right? Whatever it might be, that would be the thing that they would focus on, and then the rest of it would sort of be in the background.
Right, but it's like the no smoking, the walking, the fruits and veggies, the no stress.
Boring. Like, nobody wants to hear that.
Nobody wants to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. All right, got it. So that was the first one. The second one is about GLP-1 users and how they are low or often low on key nutrients. So this is a headline from the article. GLP-1 weight loss drugs leave users low on key nutrients, study finds. And then the subheadline is, while GLP-1 receptor agonists like semaglutide help with weight loss, new research shows users often fall short on vital nutrients, spotlighting the urgent need for tailored dietary guidance. So maybe first a quick stop on what GLP-1 drugs are. We talked about it before, but a quick reminder.
Yeah, for sure. The new weight loss drugs known as GLP-1s, they help suppress appetite. They also seem to help just reduce cravings in the brain based on the neurochemicals there, but they help with this suppression of appetite because they help people feel full. They help people feel satisfied, and it's generally because they slow the transit time of food in the GI tract. So we talk about this a lot in terms of like fiber or eating whole foods, that you have this feeling of food in your GI tract, and that's what's telling the brain, hey, you just had food you don't need to eat. And so that's what the GLP-1s are doing, regardless of the food that they're eating. Generally, again, having food in the GI tract is the signal to the brain, you just ate, you don't need to eat. So it slows digestion, keeps the food around longer, helps you feel longer, therefore you can eat less. Now, the problem with this, while it can be great for weight loss, the problem with this is when you're eating fewer calories, you want to think about it as you have less opportunity to get all of the nutrients you need, like vitamins, minerals, and fiber. So yeah, eating less processed food is good for those weight loss goals, but doesn't mean that you're getting enough vitamin A or magnesium. And these issues, when you might start to be getting low on vitamin A, magnesium, fiber, etc., you're not going to notice them right away. In fact, somebody who drastically loses a good amount of weight, they're probably going to feel great in the beginning because of that weight loss. It's not like these issues are going to crop up immediately. But when we're looking at somebody from like a long-term health perspective, we want to make sure that this smaller volume of food that they're now eating is covering those nutrients needed to be most health protective. And to be honest, this is an issue for gastric bypass patients as well, right? They've got the smaller stomach now because of the surgery. We want to make sure that in that smaller volume of food, they are still going to be covering their bases for iron, protein, fiber. You get the idea. I would say the other interesting thing about GLP-1s is not just this increased feeling of satiety that they get, but they often, because of this slowness of the GI tract, could also have symptoms like nausea or vomiting, just because it's, food's just hanging around there. So it might also be interesting for some individuals that these sickness-like feelings, not just fullness-like feelings, but sickness-like feelings could also be affecting the food choices. You know, if I'm feeling really nauseous, but I knew I had to eat, I would probably reach for more like the saltine crackers and ginger ale, which are not really high in, let's say, magnesium and fiber. And like, you're not going to be reaching for as much broccoli or kind of those whole foods if you're also having those. So those side effects could also be affecting food choices and therefore the nutrient quality they're getting overall.
Got it. Okay, so since this is something to do with the news or an article, let's get into maybe what the article said, or it seems like there's a study underneath this, so maybe what the study said.
Yeah, they basically took people who had been on these drugs for at least a month and surveyed their diet, and then they're just reporting on what they found. And what was interesting to me first out of the gates was the average caloric intake was higher than I thought it would be. They ended up getting at least 70 people to complete the study, which required people to report a 3-day log. It started at closer to 100, and then it's like people who actually got through reporting 3 days, it dropped off, which just I thought was just an interesting aside because, recording your diet gets really hard and tedious. So I totally appreciate that. But anyway, the average caloric intake for men was 1,900 and the average for females was 1,700. And we also know people, especially if they aren't super experienced, they're just sort of doing this as a one-off study and survey, that people tend to underreport. So I wouldn't be surprised if people's true intake was easily a couple hundred calories higher than those 1,900 for male and 1,700 for females. And that sort of surprised me because I wouldn't really call those low intakes. Certainly they're lower relative to where they've been, but now they're actually in the ballpark of what people are eating who are otherwise healthy individuals. Maybe less active, less muscular, all that stuff, or just smaller stature, but they're certainly in the ballpark of kind of more normal caloric intakes. But ultimately, when they started breaking down where those calories are going, it looks like they're just sort of eating less of the foods that they were eating prior. It's like they're kind of just doing the standard American diet, but now on fewer calories. So overall, this is a quote, "This study found participants consumed too many calories, saturated fat, and sodium, and not enough fiber, protein in terms of grams per kilogram, fruits, vegetables, and several vitamins and minerals such as calcium, iron, magnesium, potassium, and on they go." And just to highlight a couple of those examples, for people eating those caloric targets, fiber should be around 28 grams per day, and the average intake was only 14 grams per day. Which is interesting too, because if they have a lot of slowness and they might have even constipation, we'd really want to make sure they're up to close to the fiber guidelines, and they're only at half of that. Protein intake tended to be less than 1.2 grams per kilogram, which is about 0.55 grams per pound. So definitely below where I would put people and below kind of a minimum cutoff if we really wanted to make sure people aren't losing muscle mass in a drastic weight loss scenario. And then participants also consumed almost 50% more of the daily sodium. They're up close to 3,200 milligrams of sodium a day, and we need to be closer to 2,300 milligrams. So it's just interesting. It's pretty much all of the same issues all of the time. They're now just consuming less calories, but of the same foods that they were eating before. Certainly, losing the weights, moving them towards more healthy, but not where we want them to be from kind of that long-term optimization picture. Yeah.
Interesting. Right at the end of that headline, it said this discovery is sort of spotlighting the urgent need for tailored dietary guidance. What does that look like, if they're getting any at all, or what should it look like in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there has been any sort of guidance put out by any sort of, USDA or similar organization to say these are the nutritional guidelines for GLP-1 users, which is, of course, is a little bit unfortunate because they've just exploded in popularity and are quite effective at weight loss. So I could only assume that those types of guidelines are going to come along pretty soon. And I will say, just from a podcast and talking about this broadly, there are going to be some very individual needs and circumstances that will go above and beyond what I could offer here. And so, of course, GLP-1 users should work with a nutritionist to make sure their needs are covered, if not their doctor. But very generally, like I mentioned, once we're in this like 1,700 calorie plus range, something like my 3 pillars method approach could work. I certainly have clients, again, who are not on GLP-1s in that caloric range, and this is exactly what we're doing. If they were something like 800 calories or 1,000 calories was their intake, then we'd really have to consider maybe more of a supplement-like approach where we're trying to get all of the nutrients covered in a really small volume of food. To get all the nutrients they need without all the calories. But they're in kind of normal ranges here. So with my 3 pillars method, we're looking at quality with the fruits and veggies, then we're looking at protein and to make sure that we're keeping our muscle mass around. And then also we want to look at calories. And doing this sort of staged approach would guess what? Answer a lot of the problems that their diet has. We'd increase their fruit and vegetable consumption. We'd increase their protein consumption, which both were low. We'd increase fiber, which was low. We'd increase those various micronutrients. We'd decrease sodium. And guess what? We wouldn't increase calories to do it. I'm sure there's, like I said, individual tweaks for sure. It's just that I think they can handle a pretty broad guideline. I guess I would say off the cuff, because of the nausea and the fullness and the satiety they have from GLP-1s, that the 800-gram portion of the 3 pillars method would probably be the most difficult portion. They're so filling. Yeah. But this is where I really encourage people when they are quite full to make sure that they're not doing the 800-gram broccoli challenge, right? Like, let's have some potatoes, let's have some oranges, let's have some apples, things that have a little bit of weight to them, but they're not necessarily so voluminous. And so I think that strategy can still work, of course, not necessarily stuffing themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see something come out that looks very much like the guidelines for otherwise healthy people, the USDA guidelines, but then they just tailor it and make some notes and nuances for people on GLP-1s, because again, that caloric range, they are right there. I did want to share though, this is like such a crazy stat that I came across in the paper. In the US, only 25.3% of adults have heard of MyPlate, which is effectively how they put the regulations together. It's ultimately like, look at a plate, it should have this much, be fruits and vegetables, that stuff. So only a quarter of US adults have heard of MyPlate, and only 8% try to follow the recommendations. So I just think it's a great example of what we've talked about before. The problem isn't necessarily that the government recommendations are so bad, or I would even say in this case that the government doesn't have recommendations. The problem is, are they actually going to follow them? And so certainly going to need this population to fall in line with our just otherwise healthy individual audience, and that, yeah, we need to make whole scale changes around our habits, eating more whole foods than not just cutting back on calories.
Yeah. This is a little bit, this can go deeper, and we don't have to go too deep into this, but what this makes me think about is the fact that there are no real dietary guidance, and the fact that at least some number of people are falling into this sort of trap of just eating the same way they did before, but just less of it. Just makes me think that it's not a surprise at all, but that the push towards GLP-1 is almost entirely about weight loss and not about health gain, right? Because like if it's just like, oh, I just got to lose weight and I'm losing weight, and who cares about the nutrients? Who cares about the actual quality of the diet? It's just yes, no. Am I losing weight? If I am, good. Then this is working and this is good for me. It's just interesting that's what this is highlighting for me.
It is, but you like also just remember that there is value there. There is value for them, just weight loss, right?
Yep.
Because we do reduce their health risk. But it's just interesting to me too, in a world of health optimization, and certainly we deal with questions of like, well, I want a biohack, and what about this mark and all this other stuff. It's like, okay, weight loss is good, but now we got to keep going and look at some of the other more basic and needed nutrients.
Right. Okay, let's jump to our third article. Again, I mentioned this at the top, functional foods. The article is titled Repackaging Diet Culture, How Functional Foods Took Over the Snack Aisle, with the subheading, The Better For You Snack Market is Booming, but do the health claims live up to the marketing? So let us first figure out what are functional foods and maybe some examples.
Yeah, apparently the term functional foods was coined in the 80s by the Ministry of Health. Yeah, in Japan, which I was like, wow, Japan coming out with a functional food. This definitely seems like a U.S. marketing thing. But,
totally.
But in the U.S., the word functional has not been yet regulated by the FDA. Yep. But basically what it's come to mean are these food and drinks that claim to offer additional health benefits besides the fuel. So besides, you're just getting these calories, or you're just getting enough protein grams, that there's something above and beyond. Some examples would be high protein potato chips. So it's like typically you don't think about getting protein from potato chips, but now you can eat your chips and you're going to get this high protein, right? Or this one I really liked, probiotic cookie dough. So instead of like getting your yogurt, as we just mentioned, which might have probiotics, which we don't know if pays off, now we're just going to put some random probiotics in cookie dough. That's going to be gut health friendly. And I guess there's been a lot of foods that are advertising like GLP-1 friendly, which of course is just funny. It's like, I'm sure you've heard of, paleo friendly stuff and you're eating brownies. It's like, okay, well, GLP-1 friendly, what is that? Yep. There's a 0 sugar, high protein ice cream that basically they use a sweetener called allulose, that I guess allulose has been shown to trigger the release of GLP-1. Now, careful everybody, in rats. So we're not ready to go ahead and use this and think that it really works like a drug. That's why we have the GLP-1 drugs. But these would be some examples of it. If it's like you would typically think of this food for certain nutritional properties, and now they're going to alter it so that you want to buy it because of that one specific nutrient that might give you, quote, gut health effects or appetite suppressing effects or muscle building effects and so on.
The same advertising executives are like heart healthy, paleo friendly, GLP-1 friendly, same exact people.
Friendly.
Just moving on to the next thing. Okay, we can guess them, but what are perhaps some of the problems of functional foods?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically like we just have another version of ultra processed, or as I just say, processed foods. I mean, the phrase, you can't just put lipstick on a pig, comes to mind for me, right? We can't just sort of make this superficial change without changing any of the underlying characteristics or properties and think that we have a whole new product here. You know, the protein chips or the probiotic cookie dough, I'm going to tell you in many cases that you're going to be getting the same number of calories as regular chips or regular cookie dough. And then in cases where they might actually make this attempt to reduce the calories per serving, there's a very good chance when they have done that you're going to eat more, such as maybe the whole pint of ice cream, because of this justification that I'm eating something healthy. And the article actually calls this out. They call it a health halo, that people think, well, this is healthy, so now I can eat more of it. And we're just back to square one of we just overate calories. And then the third problem with them is that, okay, so maybe they have reduced calories or maybe you don't eat too much of it. The amount that you would have to consume to get a therapeutic dose of the thing that they're advertising, the therapeutic dose of the functional nutrient, then makes it such that you have to consume too much. Like the GLP-1 friendly protein bar, to reach what would be an equivalent amount of prescribed drug isn't possible. That's why we have a prescribed drug. There's not going to be any GLP-1 supplements or foods that will have the effect that a drug does. And then there was a lawsuit that was, I guess, settled recently. Have you heard of that alternative soda called Poppy?
No.
It's like, I think they have some they do have some added sugar in it, but they also sweeten it with this prebiotic fiber called inulin. And basically the lawsuit was like, hey, if I wanted to get enough of the dose of the prebiotic fiber called inulin, I'd have to have 4 cans of it. And at which point my added sugar is then too high. So that's the other thing. Like, even if this thing in it is going to be beneficial, how much do you have to consume? And at that point, is it kind of health prohibitive? And I guess they settled for $9 million. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just basically these are now dressed up versions of processed food. It's another great marketing attempt to get us to eat more than we need. And I just really liked this quote from a nutrition professor, Dr. Marian Nestle, in the article from New York University. Quote, nobody wants to deal with calories. It's much easier to believe in nutritional magic. End quote. And I think it's so true. It's like these past two ones that we highlighted, these past two stories highlight the fact that nutrition is never one thing. Like, calories are a central component. And so often people try to get around that. And then at the other side of the spectrum, we can't just focus on calories. Like, yes, we have to have the calories be right, but we can't miss out on our vitamin A and our magnesium and our fiber. It's all of these different nutrients we need. And not to plug the 3 pillars method, but that's how I came up with it. It's like, okay, well, how do we do this thing in a sustainable way to focus on the nutrients we need, but also get calories in line? Because that is ultimately what's going to have your best nutrition plan for you in terms of health, weight loss, etc.
Fantastic. Those 3 were slightly related, I felt like. I don't know if you did that on purpose, but they had some intersecting themes in there. So well done if that was on purpose, and good job if that was by accident.
Probably by accident, but now in hindsight, good job.
Good job. We did it on purpose. Thank you, EC. Thanks everybody out there for listening. Do make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening or watching this so you don't miss another episode. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project Podcast.